Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. So, welcome back to another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. And so, as always, we begin with lighting the candle, the village fire. If I could do that without singeing myself. And so as we gather here, fire at our center, maybe today for some reason it feels like the woods are at our backs. And here we are in a clearing. And as that image comes to me, as I say that, it feels like there's this sense of, honoring the things that we've each had to go through to bring us here together. The darkness, the twisted paths, the places we've gotten lost or thought we've been lost. And then this pause, this respite, this place to gather, take stock, be together, get warm, feel the light. And so we honor that, we acknowledge that. Take a few breaths together around that. Honoring then to the land, both as something that holds us, that cares for us, but also as the potential to teach us, both in a more literal sense and in archetypal, metaphorical senses. And so with deep gratitude from our hearts, we say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And so today I am joined for a conversation by Amana Mayfield-Faulkner, right? Hyphenated. Yeah. And I met Amana through a Kimberly Johnson program I was assisting, and we were connecting about something else towards the end of the program. And we realized we both have podcasts that circulate around the moon cycle and explore questions about like life, death, being human, all of the good juicy stuff. And so we decided to have conversations with each other. So at some point you'll be able to hear, I'll share about mine, when my guesting on her podcast comes out, I'll share about that. And I was just laughing before we started recording that you'll hear me at my nonlinear finest. And but now we're here to kind of find out a little bit more about Amana. So her bio: Amana has gathered 40 years in this earthly realm where she has been captivated by pregnancy, birth, death, mothering, sociology, culture, nature, nursing, midwifery, reiki, and mediumship. Through her path of study and exploration, she has received degrees, certifications, traveled the world, attended many births and deaths, cultivated community, crafted ceremony, birthed her own babies, and been initiated into the realms of death and grief. Amana has alchemized her personal and professional experiences into supportive one-on-one sistership offerings for women who are motivated to deepen their understanding of themselves, to explore the decisions they are making for their own lives, locating their inner compass and birthing themselves anew into their next version of becoming. Whether women come to Amana in the midst of pregnancy, grief, or self-discovery, her deepest desire is for every woman to feel the magic, intuitive knowing, strength, and wildness within themselves. Beautiful. So welcome, Amana. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm just,
Mhm.
feeling giddy, and I just, enjoy the dialogue that we have between us. So I'm excited to see what arises today.
Yeah, me too. I was saying too, before we started recording, yeah, that it just feels like really feeling the like that spring rebirth energy right now, and the giddiness of the sun and the flowers and butterflies. Yeah, it just feels very like woo. So yeah, this may also be a very nonlinear conversation. We'll see. So yeah. So I love to start each episode with inviting you like beyond your sort of more professional bio, although again it also felt like your bio was still very relational, but even beyond that, kind of what would you
Mhm.
like people to know about you, or anything that helps weave you into the larger world or the social fabric, for
Hmm.
people.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I know you said you were going to ask me that before we started recording. I'm like, oh, I have no idea what I'm going to say to that. But and what else would I like people to know? Or, I feel like I've just been on such a journey. Life has been such an interesting
Mhm,
journey for me. Like that, like I grew up in a very like structured family, very um into colonized education
mm,
and modern medicine. And not that there's any I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with that, but those are kind of like the core values that my
mm,
upbringing revolved around. And it's been interesting in like my late 20s, early 30s is sort of like unraveling some of that, and
mm,
acknowledging it's their strengths, but also acknowledging the weaknesses there and the parts of my life that I wanted to do differently than my
mm,
nuclear family upbringing. And that has been really just really interesting to experience and go through, and like feel like I'm doing things that are outside of like my parents' approval. And I was
mm,
very ingrained into being like the good girl,
mm.
and to I still have moments where I'm like, I'm not like my parents' good girl anymore, but embracing the wild woman that I am and what my own inner knowing and compass is leading me towards, and
Mm.
following that rather than like the powers that be outside of myself.
Yeah, I love that. Is there, and I know it's funny when people ask me this question, I never really know what to say, although I feel like it's coming clearer, like, um, but yeah, so I asked this knowing that I wouldn't necessarily have a specific answer, but is there, I feel like there are like sort of two types of initiations. There's like the initiation that there's like a clear cut moment where something happens and there's a very clear before and after. And
Yes.
then there's like the larger cycles of initiations that are like the ones that you're just kind of somewhat perpetually on. And there are like little moments where you have to really make a choice, like little choice forks in the path that you come to. But it's like the trajectory of the entire initiation is like much longer.
Yes.
So I feel like my journey has probably been more of those, which I think is why I often have trouble answering that question. So I'm not sure what
Hmm.
yours is, and maybe it's a combo of both, but kind of oftentimes when we have those moments where we were raised one way and then we really start to really come into this deeper wisdom, or this, I don't mean that in like a judgmental way, but just in like a getting into our sovereign wisdom, like the wisdom that our body holds, like that visceral wisdom that our body wants us to remember, especially if
Hmm.
it's at odds with kind of a lot of the culture that we're steeped in, and like the family values that we've been steeped in.
Hmm.
There's often like a moment or several moments that kind of start to prompt that. And so, yeah. So are there, yeah, do you have an initiation you can point to on that? Or what was that like?
Well, so yeah, when you were speaking to that, sort of the first few things that came up for me were like first spending a year abroad, like
Mm,
spending a year in another country was this, beautiful experience. And it was there is a before and after there, and yet it was like a year long like
mhm,
experience
mhm,
of being with a different family that spoke a different language. I was an au
Mm,
pair for these three little French girls, and
mm,
just their ways of doing things were,
mhm,
yeah, so different. They're different rules, having your hands on the table, not under the table, like
mm,
the way they cooked their meat and the different foods that they ate, and just so many ways of being that expanded my awareness and like the
mm,
knowing of the different possibilities of normal, just like learning that one outside and
mm,
then traveling with them to other places, and like that
mm,
feels like one of those, yeah, longer ones.
mhm,
And yeah, I love the way that you speak to that there's like the smaller ones that are maybe part of a continuous one. And then I also like my other big initiations, that there were solid like befores and afters, where like my first love died when I was 25, and that was like huge for me at that
mhm,
age.
mhm,
And my first real encounter with death and witnessing his last breath and being there
mm,
with him like as he was nearing the end of his life, and knowing that it was coming and then having it happen, and then
mm,
having my first major grief experience. Like, I am forever changed from that.
mhm,
Um, and then, zoom forward, like also like meeting my husband is a big before and after, and having my children and like my first baby that was born and died moments later in my arms. Like,
mm,
that was like another big before
mhm,
after moment for me.
mm.
Um, but
Yeah.
I love learning and exploring, and so I've had lots of other like sort of
Mhm,
micro smaller ones within there, and have really embraced. I love that you brought up the butterfly, because I really feel called to that like metaphor and that experience
mm,
of, rebirth and becoming anew, and that it happens over and over again in our lifetimes.
yeah. One of the archetypes I've been sitting with a lot recently is like that life, death, life goddess. Um, and sort of some of the more hag archetypes and stories. And because a lot of times I think we associate life with mother. Like it's funny how much we associate these. It's like we think of life as being when you're born, and we think of life as when women give birth. But it's like, but life is like also like everything in between, you know?
Yes.
And and then it's we think of death as being this like one final moment, kind of. It feels like in our heads that's just sort of what we usually do. And yet,
Hmm.
again, if we're talking about these cycles, these initiations, both like the really finite ones that are big, and then the finite ones that are small, and then the like larger cycles and trajectories of it, it sort of feels like, yeah, we're born and we die like again and again and again and again in our lives,
Hmm.
and I love hearing, and that's sort of what I'm hearing in some of what you're sharing, is this like really, yeah, you had these moments that sort of opened your awareness to sort of something beyond what you'd experienced until that point. And then like, what do you do with that? And like, where do you go from there, kind of? And how does that change you? And can we, how do we welcome change? Can we welcome change? And I hear too in some of what you're sharing, there was that thread about culture too coming through. And it's like when we're sort of steeped in one way of thinking about things and one set of values, that's like what seems to affect how we view the world. And then, this trip you're talking about to France, and it's like, oh, but here are these other people who have this whole other set. And suddenly your mind starts to recognize, oh my gosh, it's possible to have a whole other set of values, right? And to have a whole different culture. And so, I don't necessarily have a specific question here, but I guess sort of around these themes of kind of like culture and change, and how do we let ourselves be changed by the things that are happening to us. And so I guess based off of what you're sharing, sort of these moments that you've shared in your life, what was that like for you to kind of like realize that, I guess, like what the culture, your experiences to that point were only going to get you so far. And now you were being asked to like develop a whole different capacity or a whole new skills or a whole new viewpoint, or,
Hmm.
to come back somehow to something that you was deeper, that maybe you knew on a visceral level, but had forgotten, or, yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 I mean, like I had studied like society, studied sociology in college and like
Mm,
cultures, and like did
mm,
Scandinavian like folklore and all the, I'm
mm,
Scandinavian and heritage. So I'd taken all these different Scandinavian classes as well. I probably almost minored in it, but I just really enjoyed them as part of my experience there. I was always super curious about the ways other people did things. Well, I guess maybe not always, but in
mm,
my 20s, I was like knew that other places did it different ways, and that was part of my reason to really want to like live abroad and experience it in a deeper way. And it definitely just like, yeah, widened like the possibilities of my own life and knowing and experience too,
mm,
to just witness and be with people doing things in ways that were different than what I was used to and accustomed to. And it felt like an invitation to explore also doing things differently and not doing things the way that I had been like instructed or told was the good, only
mhm,
correct way to do lots of things in life.
mm, mm,
Like my parents, every time they cooked a steak, it had to be, like well done, like no pink on the inside. And in France, like the mom was just like, yeah, you just sear it a couple minutes on this side, a couple minutes on that side. And, it's definitely like pink and bloody on the inside. And that's how we serve it to our kids. And, I got so accustomed to eating like red meat in a different way there. And so for me, like, yeah, it widened that for like that particular experience. And the death of Bjorn, like that really opened my awareness to like what some might call like spirit realm, or
mm,
like communication like beyond
mhm,
um physical and words with one another, that I, after he died and I could like feel his presence and felt like messages or had received images and other, ways of knowing from him, it just like expanded my
mm,
understanding of life beyond like this exact meat
mhm.
suit that I'm wearing right now.
Mhm. Yeah. How do you feel? Because I'm hearing what you're sharing, like that skill. And I think some of it's a skill. I think some of it's like an instinct, right? I think some people are maybe more
Hmm.
instinctually respond this way, but it is a skill still that anybody can kind of develop more. But that,
Yeah.
like the capacity to be with the tension of difference, right? Like, because it is often there is some tension in putting ourselves in situations intentionally where the people around us view the world a little differently, or just have maybe slightly different values or approaches, right? And what is that like in your body, if you can kind of pinpoint that? Like what is, or
Yeah,
how
okay,
has it
love
been
that
for you?
question. Like, I feel like, yeah, it can be uncomfortable, right? Like, and not wanting to like, I remember not wanting to like offend people or say or do the wrong thing. Um, and for me, I guess, especially in those earlier years, was maybe easier. I was a very quiet, like kind of a fly on the wall type of person. I was very like,
Mm.
when I did the Myers-Briggs, I was like introvert, sensing, feeling, perceiving. Like,
Mhm.
just I would be present, but really like soaking in and not actually like contributing that much to conversations oftentimes. But being present and just observing and witnessing. Um, so totally just lost where I was going with that. Let me see. Hmm.
We were talking about discomfort and how it can be uncomfortable to
Yes.
be with difference. And
Yes, I
yeah.
love that. Okay. Yeah. So it was uncomfortable at first. And And then over time, it's kind of like a lot of things that I've experienced, like maybe the first time I did it, it was like really uncomfortable or I made me really nervous. But like the more that I did it, the more comfortable I was within the unknowing of it or the uncomfortability of it.
Mm, mhm, mhm,
Kind of
mm,
like starting my podcast, I was like super nervous. And every time I recorded an episode, every time I published an episode, it was like a big deal for me. But like the more that I've done it now, it's like 50 some episodes, and I'm like, it's not, it doesn't feel the same, doesn't have the same weight that it did in those
mhm,
early episodes.
mhm, mhm, mm. Yeah. I mean, I feel like some of that, what that points to, I don't know about you, but for me, like in those moments, I've started, actually like building ritual around those moments where I feel uncomfortable so that it's like I'm celebrating and honoring that I did something that made me uncomfortable and that I didn't
Mhm.
die, you know, like,
Yes.
and then it's like your nervous system's like, oh, right. Okay. And then it like gives you the positive feedback too of like, yes, that was really scary. Congratulations. I'm really proud of you. You did an amazing thing doing something that was like feels really hard for you or challenging or scary, and then like no matter how it turns out, it's like at least I've sort of like acknowledged myself that, or like some days it's like, I'll have on my to-do list, like, okay, reach out to this person and this person and this person and this person and this person about that. And it's like,
Mhm.
that is way beyond my nervous system's capacity for one day. Right. And like, so I'll get to the day and I'll be like, and I'll send an email and I'll notice my heart's like racing and my body's like, oh, and I'm like having all those, like, I just did something scary and outside of my comfort zone responses. And then I'll be like, okay, maybe I only send that one email today. And like, maybe I send the other emails tomorrow. And like, I'm just like trying to like be a partner with my body in those moments. And yeah, because I mean, I think that's some of it too, right? Like true initiations are the things like we never ask for them. We might
Mm-mm.
ask for something, but what we get from it rarely looks like how we thought it would look. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an initiation. It would just be a grocery list. like,
Right. Yes.
um,
And like I feel like sometimes for me, like fear of like rejection or fear of saying or doing something wrong would get in the way for me a lot when I
mm,
was younger. And like experiencing Bjorn's like desire to live, and yet he wasn't able to continue on in the earthly realm. And like it gave me this new sort of like fire and a little bit of
mm,
fearlessness of
mm,
like, tomorrow is guaranteed to no one. And so like I'm gonna put myself out there even when it's uncomfortable. And that actually feels good to me in another way because
mm. You're alive.
I'm alive and I'm
Mm,
able to do that and I'm able to try that. And if I don't, like I have also been with so many people like on their deathbed and they're like regretting all the things they didn't do. And I'm like,
mm,
that's not gonna be my path. Like, and yes,
mm,
I'm gonna fail sometimes and some people aren't gonna respond to me and I'm gonna reach out and I'm gonna put myself out there anyway. And it's okay.
mhm.
And I'll feel better having done it.
Yeah. Mm. It's funny, I mean, I feel like one of the things the life, death, life goddess has to teach us a lot, gods and goddesses, is like that until we can make friends with the idea of death, we're actually not really alive. And I was just reading some of Sharon Blackie's Haggitude yesterday, and she was talking about, and this is another idea too I've been thinking about for a while and have heard other people speaking to too, but that idea, like I feel like we've gotten fixated on this idea of safety right now in our culture, and that like the be all end all is to feel safe. And while I believe people should have places where they feel safe, and I'm very aware that there are many people in the world who do not have any places where they feel safe, and that's a problem, right? So naming that, um, but yeah, but this idea that somehow safety is the thing that we're aiming for, when in reality, like being alive is inherently unsafe and we're
Mhm.
all going to die. So like, and we seem to have this idea that safety means not death, and like, so I've been sitting with like complicating this idea of safety and, and then Sharon Blackie was saying, we're here to risk it all. Like she just kept saying that in
Mhm.
the book, like we're here to risk it all. And yeah, so I don't know, I guess, does that take you anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about just like the way sometimes I feel like, especially in our culture here, we can put the responsibility of safety on someone else, or like we think that someone
Mm,
else or a system provides us safety
mm,
in some way. And that might be true at times in certain ways, but I agree with you of this like feeling of the like, but safety can also be an illusion because no one knows exactly what's going to happen
mhm,
day
mm.
to day. Sorry, I
It's
don't
okay.
know.
Allergies.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's true
yes.
where you are. That's definitely
Yeah,
true where I
yeah, the
am.
pollen is coming, yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Mm,
like, and yet, yeah, we are really just not accustomed in in the Anglo world that we're living in right now, that we don't really look at death or honor death in our daily lives, even though like nature outside like shows it to us in the seasons, and
mhm,
yet it's on our plates, like when we're eating, whether we're eating vegetables or meat, like that's death right there, and yet we don't
mm,
acknowledge it that way.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's funny as you're talking, I'm like wondering, I'm finding myself wondering, do we are we so fixated on safety because we don't feel belonging, like true belonging? And so I'm wondering if we like have sort of somehow come to try and equate those two, or somehow have gotten confused about which one we're actually hungry for, and we think we're hungry for safety when we're actually hungry for is a deeper sense of belonging.
I've never looked at it in that way or thought about it in that way, and yet that like really lands for me in
Mm,
that. Yeah, I do feel like belonging is what most people are really searching for and
mm,
feeling like they have a place, whether it's in
mhm,
like their small, like nuclear family, in in the greater layers of just
mhm,
feeling like they mean something to the world around them.
mhm.
And that within that, there is that safety in like the culture and the community.
Right. Yeah, that's what kind of got me thinking of it, because it was like I was sort of thinking about ways in which, we used to have
Mm.
more rituals, community spaces for storytelling, for repair, for, whatever. And that is part that directly increases our capacity for more difference, for more attention, for more initiations, for more of the things in life that come at us that we didn't choose and we don't necessarily want and might feel really uncomfortable to welcome, but that ultimately can serve some sort of evolution if we have the capacity to like go into those spaces and come out the other side. And and so much of that is having the elders, having the containment, having the community, and so it's like we don't have to be safe if we have belonging, actually.
Yes, yes. I feel like, yeah, for most people, especially like that first like dive into like the depths of the unknown, or the like underworld, some might call it, like that, it's like we're avoiding that at all costs for, and maybe staying in relationships or not communicating like to our with honesty in relationships, or all sorts of different like layers to that, or possibilities of how that might express itself. But we're doing that like kind of in that way of, yeah, wanting to stay safe. But like you're saying, if you have the community around you, or hear stories of other people that have like gone to the depths before and gone to the underworld, then that can help like hold, and you can a person I feel like would feel maybe a little bit safer when they feel that like dive, whether it's like something they welcomed or that surprise initiation like into the underworld, that they can be held and feel safe in that, and knowing that they will like be held by the community and brought back up and are safe within that underworld, because it is just part of the human experience, whether we want it to be or not.
Mhm. I know you do a lot of what you call sistership work. And so like how does that kind of feed into what we're kind of talking about right now?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I call it sistership because like mentorship feels a little bit too like
Mm,
hierarchy for me,
mm,
and I want it to feel more like, you have your own, and you have the answers for you. I don't have the answers for you. I can be a mirror, I
yeah.
can be a support, but so that's why I choose that term. But yes, with women that come to work with me, it's like this um oftentimes it is when they're in one of these like transformative journeys of like pregnancy, or they've had a loss of a loved one, or where they're feeling lost within themselves or within the greater culture.
Mhm.
And so um I help to create like the space for them to, yeah, dive deep into the unknown and ask themselves those questions and find their own inner knowing, and realize that it's there and that they don't always have to look outside for
Mm,
answers, and that they can be held within the discomfort, and that it won't be forever.
mm. I love what you're pointing to there because I feel like that gets into sort of that like again kind of tension that I feel like we often have culturally around like sovereignty versus interdependence, you know. And I feel like a lot of times sovereignty has kind of that word is everywhere and oftentimes has like come to mean actually more like toxic individualism and actually like to the detriment of community, you know. And so I love what you're pointing to there of like we or what I'm hearing and what you're pointing to there is sort of this idea that we're more likely to be able to find our inner answers and our inner teacher to be able to go into the depths and do that journey to find that if we have somebody holding the space. And so there's that like, yes, it's not that we're looking for answers outside of us or that someone outside of us can give us something that we can't give ourselves, but it's like we can't go in and plumb those depths and like go on that inner journey unless we know that someone's like taking care of the space and holding the space and going to help us be able to come back out again or you know yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and
It's
I do feel like it's possible for people to do it themselves, and yet, especially if someone hasn't done it before, I feel like that's when it can be like really potent for someone to have more like containment within it. And then, they learn from that experience, and then the next time they're
yeah,
diving in that direction, they have some tools and skills, and like understand that it's not like a one-way street and they're never coming back up, but that they're going down and they will rise again.
yeah, 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 because I definitely feel like as I've gone through my journey I can do more and more of that for myself. um And I could not have at the beginning because you really don't know what you don't know at the beginning. If for me
Hmm.
anyway, that's been my
Yeah.
journey, I feel like. And now it's like I'm at the point where I know what I know, and I also know enough to still know what I probably don't know, or have like an inkling of like when I get to some point where I'm like, oh, now I'm coming up against something I don't know. And like I might need to call in other support, whether that's books, whether that's people, whether that's, you know, whatever that
Hmm.
is. And um, but yeah, but it does. It feels like initially at the beginning, you know, it's like we really don't have the skills. And again, I think some of that comes back to culture. Like we just don't culturally, we're
Hmm.
not taught any of those skills from a young age. So when we get older and we really start to face kind of the risk and consequences of being alive and being human and being sovereign, you know, it's like then we really don't have the skills for that actually.
And it is so important to be witnessed and held. And like I had so much of that in my
Mm,
have had so much of that and continue to have that in different, types of relationships with people. And I feel like that's, yeah, so important in creating culture and community and
mm,
cultivating that in our own ways. And it just nurtures me. And I feel like it is, I don't know, one of my life's callings to
mm.
be with.
Yeah, I feel that. Is there I know you talked about Scandinavian like myths and stories, and
Hmm.
is there like a particular Scandinavian archetype of like the a goddess or mother figure of like who that being with that you feel like is particularly resonant?
Hmm.
Or maybe
Don't,
it's
you
something
know,
else.
um, I Well, it really just brings me to when you asked that. Well, first I thought about like there was also a Scandinavian sexuality class that I took with
Mm,
this woman that she was Swedish, and she was just like, I loved her just energy and the storytelling in the way that she taught, like that inspired speaking and storytelling is like one of my favorite ways to learn from other
mhm,
people and women. And she told stories of, them like whole families living in one room, and how they still, like created space for sensuality and making love, and that was like an
mm,
important thing in their culture, and that it was like more normal for children or other people to witness it sometimes, and that it wasn't this like thing to be done that's wrong and behind closed
mhm,
doors. And
mhm,
she spoke to her children and taking them to the beach in California, and that everyone was appalled that like she wanted to let them just be naked,
mm,
and that everyone thought that that was like so wild. But in Sweden it was more normal, or at least for little girls, just to have bottoms on but not tops. Like that was something in
mhm,
France as well. The
mhm,
girls, even at like 8, 9 years old, only wore bottoms and not a top. And
mm,
it's just so it just again opened my awareness to like the different ways of viewing, and the way that where we grow up really shaped my understanding of what was normal or good or
mm, mm,
bad.
mm,
um I just really appreciate really appreciated the exploration of these other ways. And I don't have a particular like archetype like you
mhm, mhm,
asked, but just
mhm.
like just these different ways of being
Yeah,
human on
yeah,
this earth in a different place.
yeah, yeah. I love that, and and I think that points to again. This is what I'm hearing and what you're saying, but just I think there's so many different types of like coaching and like quote unquote being with out there, and some are like, or there's a difference maybe between guiding in the sense of being a teacher and guiding in the sense of being with, which I think is some of what you're pointing to, right? Is like guiding in the sense of being a teacher. It's like I have this way of viewing things and I'm going to impart it to you. And, you know, and that's there's nothing wrong with that. And I've gotten personally, I've gotten better at being able to sit in spaces like that and be like, okay, here's where what you're saying is actually really more about you and it worked for you. And I'm glad to hear that and like open my mind to that perspective, but something in that doesn't feel right for me. So I'm just going to like say thank you for that and leave that to the side. But then this other thing you're saying, like, oh, that does feel like that's maybe going to work for me, or that might be interesting, and as opposed to then like the guiding and through being with, where it's like, you know, sitting, asking questions, helping that person find their answers so that it's like, and it does, I think it requires, again, certain that like that capacity to be so open to other ways of seeing the world. And it's like, just because I see the world in this particular way and my experiences and values have shaped the way I view the world, doesn't mean that, well, I might be able to see something that you don't see yet about yourself or some of these patterns. Is there a way I can point to that in a way that like invites you to say it or see it in like your view and in your, like, instead of like, I'm just going to tell you what I'm seeing and what you should do, you know?
Yes.
And yeah, so I don't know, I was hearing that in what you were, that just kind of that like willingness to, again, to be expanded by what's possible out there
Mhm.
and be changed by that. Um, yeah. Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Yes, taking what feels right and true to you and leaving what does not. Yeah, when I work with women, I definitely um am intentional about like inviting them to try out different things, but not saying this is the one thing or this is your answer, because I
Mhm.
don't know that, like we can't know that. And
Mhm.
we never know what it's like for the person in front of us, what their life has been like, all those,
Mhm.
days and years and that they've lived in their body and all the experiences that they've had.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't ever really know somebody else. Like we can, and yet we can't, you know.
Yes.
And even if you know each thing that's happened to them, like it still doesn't mean you actually understand exactly how that felt to them or like what that meant to them or how they viewed what it was that happened to them. I mean, I think that's
Mhm.
part of why these types of conversations are so powerful, because it gives people a chance to tell their story in their terms and in their ways. And even then, it's like the tiniest glimpse into who that person is and like all the things that have shaped them. And, um, again, that feels like sort of that, like those initiation cycles of like these longer trajectory, these longer cycles.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that my brain's drawing that connection. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody
Yeah.
else, but
It is to me, and I just keep seeing, yeah, the butterfly and the,
yeah.
metamorphosis and the just the what an experience that is in and of itself, and that there is, like that there's I remember hearing once about how, when a butterfly is starting to like come out of their cocoon, that this like the struggle is like purposeful, and that like if you just open them up, then like they don't have the strength and they don't have like.
Mm,
And it's similar to like a birth, and when babies are, coming through the birth canal and they're getting the squeeze, and they like that experience is
mm,
intentional and purposeful. And
mm,
um yeah, that the struggle is part of the whole,
mhm.
spectrum of the experience.
Yeah, man, I have been in resistance to struggle at different seasons of my life. It's so easy to want to resist that. I don't know, for me anyway, maybe not for
Yes.
everybody, but yeah, that whole like life happening for you, not to you thing. Like some days I am so clear on that, and some days I am so not. Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
yes. Have you had like what's a big metamorphosis or sort of like caterpillar into butterfly experience that you had in your life?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think my depression in my teen years and college years was definitely one of those things that was more of a long drawn out kind of one rather than a
Mhm.
concrete specific moment, but
Mhm.
definitely that was one. Um and then I'm like only recently I think getting enough distance to see that I've been in another like really kind of big cycle one for probably the last 5 to 7 years. and I think it started, we talk a little bit about this on the podcast episode I recorded with you, but with my getting the diagnosis, my dad is a genetic degenerative eye disease. And
Mhm.
back in, I think, 2016, I think it was, I found out that I have the same. And um, yeah, and that's like a journey that I think I've both like have dealt with and also have really not dealt with, and I think that's the thing with those kinds of like long-term unknown diagnoses, right? Is like dealing with it and not dealing with it is like a constant ongoing thing.
Mhm.
um And then, and then it becomes hard to untangle, like where you sort of take some of these, like, what are the decisions? How did that change some and influence decisions I made after that point? And some of those, again, it's more clear. And some of those I'm realizing that was actually at the heart of why I made the decision that I made later. But it wasn't even totally clear to me at the time how much that was influencing those choices that I was making. Um, so yeah, that's part of where too, I think sometimes, like I said, these initiations can kind of be like sneaky, and you're like too in it at the time to have that perspective, that wider perspective. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I think that's part of it. Like an initiation, like we were talking about that butterfly, like you're supposed to turn to goo, and the butterfly isn't the caterpillar isn't logically thinking, okay, right, I'm going to turn to goo and it's going to happen on exactly this timeline. And then I'm suddenly going to magically come out the other side and I can see where I'm going to come out, and what it's going to be. And so like, because then there's no faith, then there's no trust, then you don't have to surrender. You're still some logical part would still be in control. And then it's not actually an initiation, right? So yeah, so I feel like then there was the moment where I decided to go nomadic, and like I bought this old RV and was going to fix it up, and that was it was beautiful and an utter disaster, like that whole process, and really deeply depleted my nervous system. But then, and so it's taken me, and really, like, again, I'm sort of, I think in the last 3 years or so, I've been really coming to realize how much it affected my own view of myself and these things I thought I knew about myself. And like, it really stripped a lot of that away. And so, yeah, so it's been this like, it's funny. It just hit me the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, it was a really old RV. It was like a 36-year-old RV, right? When I bought it. And that was like 3 years ago now. So it's like yeah. Or I guess it wasn't. Anyway, whatever. It's in its late 30s. It's about the same age as me. It's a little bit younger than me. I'm only slightly older than the RV. And but I realized like it was an elder to me. It was eldering me, actually.
Mhm.
And like there was a lot of then like that was a really beautiful realization that kind of shifted some things for me. But it's been, yeah, so I don't know. It's like these moments where you have to have faith, and then you also have to be open to like, yeah, sometimes our teachers and elders are not in human form
Mhm.
and not able to give us those clear-cut answers because they're pointing us back to finding the answers inside of ourselves. And like that Rilke quote, live the questions now so that you live your way into the answers. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but like, you can't be given the answers now because you wouldn't be able to hold them or understand them. So you just have to live the questions until eventually you live your way into the answers.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that feels so, I don't think I've actually heard that quote, but that like feels like my life of just like having so many questions. Like from a young child, I was so like mesmerized by birth and babies and motherhood and like the unknowns and like where do we come from? Like how do we get into our mother's womb and like how does it happen and when does it, like when it happens and the spontaneity that birth is like
Mm,
meant to be, but right now it's not in our industrialized medical system, but like the way that we those like unknowns and my questions about like death and like all these wonderings. And I have been uncovering and unearthing the answers like throughout my life. So I think that
Mm,
that is a really, yeah, beautiful way to word that.
mm. Yeah, well, so I just pulled up the quote in case other people haven't heard it, or yeah, it's
Perfect.
part of a longer thing that he wrote called Letters to a Young Poet, but this is Maria Rilke. But the one that people kind of most know is part of it that says, "Be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer."
Yes. Yes. I mean, life is so magical and it's
Mm,
so like such a gift each day. And I feel like it can be so easy to get like trapped in like the daily grind and like the tasks that we're doing and going from here to there and not like soak in just like the little precious moments. And I know you spoke to like creating ritual within like your in other ways of your life. And I feel like it's been a beautiful thing to for myself incorporate ritual into just like daily life, and it helps me to be more present in the now and soak in the moments of daily life, whether it's taking a shower or having a warm cup of tea or coffee or just sitting there with my children or playing or bedtime, like
mm,
a good meal, cooking, like all of these things can be an experience that feels nourishing, and it doesn't have to be like a task that I have to do and get done. Like when I'm making dinner, it can be like this, and it can be an enjoyed experience that I am interacting with the food and the space that I'm in and the other people around me, and
mm.
it
Do you feel like you've been
changes.
in, what were you going to
Yeah.
say?
I
Sorry.
was just gonna, sorry, it like changes the experience of the
Yeah.
food, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've been in seasons of your life where things have where life has felt more like a burden or like something to kind of be survived or get through? Like, do you feel like you ever kind of hit seasons like that?
Yes, yes, I've definitely had seasons of that. Like for me, sometimes it was maybe like in like academia and like
Mm,
having to like absorb all the content and trying to memorize and read all these things and like
mm, mm,
not feeling like I have enough hours in the day to like even really do that.
mhm,
Um, or to write the paper and take the test and
mm,
pay all the
mm,
bills, and like there are just like where it was like so many things that I had to do or thought that I had to do
mhm, mhm,
that took over my day, or also like periods of, yeah, deep like depression or grief
mhm,
where I just was like could barely get out of bed or shower myself or make
mm,
food or eat food. Like those times also were that.
mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I asked because I feel like I'm just in the last couple of months, like just sort of coming out of one of those. And I mean, some of that I think is like COVID. It's been kind of a hard couple years for I think everybody in different ways, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but like some of it too has really been, I think, since I bought the RV and I thought I knew what this next phase of my life was going to look like. And I had a very clear picture of what I thought it was going to happen. And I don't think I thought I had a clear picture, but some part of me did. And, and the reality of it was so different and so destabilizing to some part of me that thought it knew and thought it was in control and thought it knew who I was and what I wanted, and yeah. And so I don't know, just in what you're sharing, it kind of got me thinking about, yeah, maybe I think it is easy to get to those places either when we're living out of our design, like out of our alignment, out of that truth of like feeling like at least most of the hours of the day we're really getting to do things that really feel like they're like what our soul feels like it's here to do, um but also that some of it is like a perspective and an approach too that actually becomes the alchemizing agent that helps like bring us out the other side, because I feel like that was some of it was I was, it was through some meditation and working with some different plant medicines and, working with some of my non-human guides that
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in the last couple of months, I've just been getting these like really clear, like fierce love kind of messages of like, okay, you've been in the goo long enough. And now you need to like actually change and find the joy again if you really want to come out the other side. And like, and kind of getting that like, okay, stop wallowing now. Like, like,
Yeah.
and not that I feel like I was wallowing, but it just like there reaches a point where like the being the darkness in the darkness isn't going to get
Mm-hmm.
you out the other side.
Right.
And and again, not that being the darkness is bad. I feel like it's really expanded my capacity to be with some of those hag archetypes, some of those like the Baba Yaga, like kind of slightly scary crones who like live in the woods and like, you know, like you got to approach them carefully, because they've got deep wisdom, deep medicine, deep love. And sometimes it looks really scary, and dark. And, um, and I do feel like for me, that's what, you were talking about, sort of this like being with energy and, and part of why I asked you about the archetype of the being with energy for you was that like, there are so many of these different sort of mother goddess, father god archetypes that I feel like can point to these slightly different ways of being with these different energies, And so like there's like the grandmother archetypes that are like the loving, pull up the cup of tea, wrap you in a blanket, like, serve you and offer healing to the world, like through that kind of space. And then they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, the slightly scary, like crone in the woods, like, and I definitely feel like I carry more of that slightly scary crone in the woods energy. And so, I feel like, yeah, I had to be in that darkness for a while to get to be friends with that place a little bit. But then it's like, okay, but that doesn't have to be all of who you are. Like there's also joy and like come back again, come back again, come back again.
Yeah. And I mean that like scary energy can also be like light and playful sometimes too.
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm,
it's not all like bad or dark. And yeah,
mm-hmm,
being in that darkness helps you to bring maybe some of that energy also to the light in the
mm-hmm.
positive ways.
Yeah. Well, or just, you and I both know from nervous system work, right? Like charged state is charged state. It can be
Mhm.
charged in fight or flight. It can be charged in play. And like
Mhm.
expanding our capacity to be with those challenging things and the quote unquote darkness, it's only effective if it's also expanding our capacity to be with joy and pleasure and like these other alchemical ingredients that are, yeah,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
kind
it's
of
so
help.
interesting working with people in grief too. Like this is something that people speak to that when a loved one dies or they have this first big experience with death and grief, it also as hard and dark and challenging as it is, it also they feel like expanded into the joy in a way that they never were before. Like they experience joy and love and life on this level or on this with this depth or width or whatever you want to call it that
Mm-hmm,
they weren't able to like embody or reach to or feel when they hadn't felt like this opposite end of it
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm,
that same like with that same strength.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so people speak to like almost like the gift of grief being this like the other side of it, like you're saying, with the pendulum and the swing, and it's, it's both and.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm. I feel like I'm aware of our time and sort of starting to kind of, maybe bring this down and in a little bit, but there's a piece here that I feel like this thread has been kind of dancing through that we haven't quite teased yet, and I feel like that's a nice segue of like kind of the mediumship. And so this idea of, that opening the portal, like death can kind of open the portal to our awareness of these other spaces. And I guess what has kind of been, and how has that maybe contributed to the joy or helped keep that wider perspective that sort of contextualizes some of like when you're in the goo, or what has been your experience with that? Like what?
Mhm. Yeah, for me, like mediumship is actually like a term I only like that came into my sphere in just a few years ago.
Mm,
Even though I grew up in a non-religious or spiritual household, so I didn't really have like the language of spirit or mediumship or life beyond. Even though when I was 25 and like Bjorn died, I like experienced that and experienced these different ways of communicating the like all the different clairs, and yet
mhm.
I didn't know what a clair was. I didn't know any of this, like um
Yeah, for people
so
listening really quickly, she's talking about like clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, the different, that's what when people talk about clairs, that's what they're talking about. So anyway, okay, keep going.
yeah, that's good. And so it wasn't until a few years ago when my friend introduced me to this woman, Danielle Sarang. She's an Indigenous woman in Squamish, BC, Canada. And it's actually one of like my friends, like she knows her in real life. And I started exploring like her podcast, and I've done some mediumship development with her. And it was like through her podcast, and then I started being given like the language for what I was experiencing within
Mm,
what I now know to be like called mediumship,
mhm,
or like or psychic, or I guess
mhm,
people see
mhm,
them as two different categories, but also they can
mhm,
be
mhm,
blended as well.
mhm,
And just like learning my own intuitive abilities, I believe that we're all capable of
yeah.
communicating in these ways, and it's like a skill and a practice and something that we can explore if we choose to. And it was something that with that first death initiation, I really experienced it, but didn't have the language for it. And
Mhm,
then having the language for it has allowed me to like interact with it in a new way.
mm,
And then some of the practices that she offered of tools of like learning and exploring it has helped me to like hone the skill and to maybe and to just understand, because like if we don't have the language for it, it almost like makes it not real.
mm, mhm, mhm,
And so for me, it's also just it's been a part of me that I've kept hidden for a
mhm,
period of my life, because I like felt like it was bad or people wouldn't understand it,
mhm,
or like just had these different feelings about it. And even like when I started doing energy work and learning that, and did the Reiki,
mhm,
all the
mhm,
spectrum of Reiki and other energy work from different people, it was like exploring this whole other way of interacting with the world around me that I didn't know
mhm,
existed, or that maybe I guess I did know existed, but I didn't understand the language
mhm, mhm,
to
mhm.
interact with it.
Yeah, and maybe didn't have the mirroring from other people who you respected being like, what you're feeling is real. And you're like, oh, like, because I feel like that happens a lot in sessions with people.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday, I was with a client who, um, is, yeah, I mean, I think that was most of the session was me just actually validating. And then it was beautiful to see how he like really opened up and like all these stories just came pouring out of him that I suspect he hasn't ever told to anybody before, because so much of society poo-poos that kind of that language, and so you're
Mm-hmm.
right, we don't have the language, we don't have the mirroring, we don't have the things in place that tell us like this is an entirely valid proprioceptive like sense
Yes.
of the world, interoceptive and proprioceptive, and like yes, there's like the physical interoception and proprioception, but then there's the non-tangible interoception and proprioception. And those are completely valid and incredibly important. And, I mean, yeah, and I think that's part of what happens in initiations when we become so gooey, kind of when we go into that cocoon and completely turn to goo, and, and have no conscious logical direction anymore, and don't have the same physical tangible anchors that maybe we used to have, whether it's because we lost someone or something, or just our own sense of relationship with those things is changing. And it's like,
Mhm.
then the only wayfinding tools we have really at our disposal are the subtle ones, actually. And
Mhm.
um
Yeah, I mean, our current culture is so focused on like what's scientifically able to be
mhm,
like measured and proven and like seen. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how I like Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks to like
mhm,
how science is starting to like
mhm,
prove some of these like other ways of knowing to
mhm,
be true with their ways of measuring. But
mhm,
it's
mhm,
just these ways that like when we were, when I was 10 or when I was 20 even, it was like seen as like, no, that is like cannot be true, that's never going to be proven.
mhm,
And now, because science is actually able to prove it in their way, it's like becoming more understood. Or to some people, I would say, I guess,
mhm,
still like some
mhm,
people are still like, no, if I can't really see it, then it's not
mhm.
true. um yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. There was something I was going to ask, one follow-up thing about the um, mediumship. Well, I guess one of the things that was occurring to me too as you were speaking is it feels like that. And so I guess maybe the question is, does this feel true to you? Does it feel like developing those skills actually help with sort of some trust or faith in that life, death, re-life kind of cycle, like in those rebirth cycles, because there's this sense that death isn't as finite as like maybe it feels like it is.
Hmm.
Is that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I had that knowing just from my earlier experience with death, that like I didn't know until he did die, and then I could feel that it wasn't like forever, that
Mm,
that yes, his physical body was gone, but that something lived on, that there
mhm,
was that like
mhm,
soul tangible experience. And yes, mediumship has definitely like built my trust and understanding of that in a greater way, and having more interactions where I'm doing readings for other people, that they're also feeling that, and that I'm like, oh, so like what I'm like seeing in my mind and I'm describing to this person in front of me, that, this man sitting on the bench and these, specific things. And then like when the reading's over, he's like, you were describing this like exact picture of my uncle, and showing it to me. And I'm like, okay, like where, that was like early on where I was like not fully trusting like what felt like I was being
mhm,
communicated with from this other like soul. And that having those experiences has definitely, yeah, deepened my trust and
mhm,
knowing into the other realms.
mm. That's beautiful. So, how can people find you? This feels like it's kind of a good place to land. Does that feel
Sure,
true for you? Is there more
sure.
that you feel like you want to say to wrap it up?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like we could talk for a long
I
time, but I
know.
think, but but this feels good.
Good
Yeah.
for now, for today, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a podcast as well, The Heart of the
Hmm.
Soul. And yes, you'll hear Kate on it here coming up. And so that's one way. And I have a website. It's www.birthingnova.love. And there I have my sistership offerings for women, And, oftentimes women come to me in the seasons of pregnancy, birth, and mothering, but also
Mhm.
other times. And I have specific, unique offerings for grief and also mediumship readings there too.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure I have the links to both of those, the podcast and the website in the show notes. And yeah. Hmm. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been a fun dialogue and conversation.
Yeah, it sure has. So yeah, so let's all just kind of take a few deep breaths in and out together as we begin to wrap this moment around the fire, and just acknowledging and honoring whatever it is that's ours to take from the fire today, and letting offering up anything that we feel like we're complete with and ready to leave. We can always offer that to the fire. So as we, yeah, start to kind of prepare to go our separate ways, we just know that, um, yeah, that there are spaces and ways we can start to craft belonging. And so, yeah, so we'll see you next time around the fire. And, if you were here for Amana, like, welcome, glad to have you here. And if you want to keep tuning in for more conversations like these, we'd love to have you. And yeah,
Mhm.
so thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mhm. Hi, Kate here again. Thank you for gathering with us. Whether you've been here a while or found your way here thanks to today's guest, it means so much to me and the world I dream of to have you here. I hope you'll tune in for more of our conversations. We humans seem to be at a profound threshold and facing questions of deep impact for the future and the world. We need our full hearts and humanity as we sow seeds of change in these times of joy and heartbreak. I count myself lucky to be here now, around this virtual village fire, weaving our stories into a medicine with humans like you. As a community medicine space, this podcast is relational. It weaves webs of connection and mutual respect and care across time and space. If you appreciate and support the future we're seeding here, you can support the weaving of this web in a few ways. 1. Share episodes with friends and family or online with your community. It also helps the podcast immensely if you like, rate, subscribe to, or follow the podcast where you watch or listen, so you get notified when new episodes drop and new listeners find us as they search. 2. Join us on Patreon. Doing so supports conversations like the one you just heard and allows you access to live community gatherings and medicine circles and more as we continue to grow. It also helps me keep the space advertisement free so the conversations stay intact as they are. If you have questions, suggestions, connections, or would like to find out more about working with me, you can find me online at www.wildsacredjourney.com, on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or email me, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. Until next time, from my heart to yours, I release today's fire with a prayer for our individual and collective wholeness, connection, and joy. May it be so.